Welcome to the Calm Cockpit Podcast, the show that helps pilots think clearly, stay calm, and perform at their best when it matters most. Each episode delivers practical strategies, real-world aviation wisdom, and mindset tools that help create confident pilots and safe flights.
What if the key to safer flying isn't sharper stick and rudder skills, but better decisions before the engine even starts?
Today, we're talking about threat and error management, the system professional pilots use to identify risks, trap mistakes, and stay ahead of problems before they become emergencies.
Our guest is Mike Jesch, senior Boeing 787 captain, flight instructor, fast team representative, and one of aviation's leading voices on pilot proficiency and safety.
Mike will share his practical tools every pilot can use, from personal minimums and mental rehearsal to managing workload, using automation wisely, and avoiding what he calls birthday party surprises in the cockpit.
If you want to strengthen your judgment, sharpen your risk management skills, and fly with greater confidence, this episode is for you.
The Calm Cockpit Podcast starts now.
Onyx 12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, licensed yoga and meditation educator and music educator with over 30 years of experience of teaching high performers how to improve their lives, but without adding stress. And I'm also a midlife student pilot.
And I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and flight instructor. I've known our guest, my friend, Mike Jesch, for many years, and I'm very happy to finally bring him into this interview for all of you.
And I'm so happy you did, because for me, this interview was like sitting at the feet of accumulated knowledge and wisdom, hearing you and Mike go back and forth. I've listened to the whole interview twice now, and each time I keep hearing new bits of information. So I am super psyched to share this with our listeners. Mike's bio is immense, so I'm going to try to summarize his highlights here. The first of which, Mike Jesch is the General Aviation Award 2026 National FAA Safety Team Representative.
Yay.
That's a big deal. Like, yay! Like, sound the trumpets and the horns. Like, that's a huge deal. That's a national award. Really speaks to like his wisdom and everything that he does to help aviation remain safe. He earned his private pilot certificate before he graduated high school, became a flight instructor at 21, and secured a place at the airlines at 23 because he's so boss like that. So that means today we won't do the math on his age. He has 40 years of aviation experience, and he is now a senior captain on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Wow. Yes, the Dreamliner. What a beautiful, beautiful plane. So he keeps his GA skill sharp, though, in that general aviation. He specializes in Cessna 182 and Mooney checkouts, as well as IFR training, especially when it involves complex air traffic control procedures. He serves as the chief instructor for a local multi-engine program, is a regular at the local Experimental Aircraft Association Young Eagles events, and volunteers for Lighthawk and Angel Flight West. Holy moly. Mike Jesch is a big supporter of the FAST program and regularly works with pilots, instructors, and other FAST team representatives to improve their knowledge of the Federal Aviation Administration safety.gov website and the Wings pilot proficiency program that we have here in the U.S., which is fantastic. Even me as a student pilot, I've taken Wings programs. They're really, really great. He's personally completed hundreds of Wings ground and flight activities, validated thousands of credits for pilots, and achieved 25 basic, 20 advanced, and 18 master Wings phases. Holy moly. And recently, he finished qualifying to become a designated pilot examiner. I think, what else could we add onto that bio? There's not much besides maybe piloting the space shuttle. That's about all that's left.
Our chat with Mike really dials into the core principles of threat and error management, otherwise known as TEM, and how it correlates to improved mental performance in aviation. And at this point, we're going to send you to the interview, and Geeta and I will meet up with you on the other side with our key takeaways. So enjoy this chat with Mike Jesch. Mike Jesch, welcome to the Calm Cockpit.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here finally. Thanks. I've been enjoying the show for a long time and glad to be here.
For those that don't know, you're a prolific flight instructor. You've worked with a previous guest, Brian Schiff. You guys had your 4-flight workshops that you worked on together for a while. You and I came into contact years ago, also through Brian, but when I was still working for the National Association of Flight Instructors, we had a couple really good recordings back then. And for those of you that haven't heard that, I encourage you to. Mike is pretty amazing. You know, my favorite thing has always been, and we've talked about this multiple times, is I just like to name drop you for random reasons. I'm sure people are finally wondering, like, who is this Mike guy and why does he keep just talking about him? And so, Calm Cockpit listeners, this is the famous Mike Jesch that I just like to, hey, Mike, I know you're listening, but now you're here.
I was wondering what that ringing in my ears was. I guess it was just you dropping my name all over the place. But yeah, every so often I'll get a text message or an email from somebody that says, hey, John talked about you on this, or, somebody dropped your name on here. And it's kind of fun. I really enjoy that.
We are about to have a great chat. We have talked so many times about just some of the burning secrets of aviation. And so in the pre-meeting that we had for this, one of the topics that came up was threat and error management. Obviously at the airline, that's something that you guys focus on quite heavily. But with your instructor hat on, instructors are really starting to pick up this concept as well, kind of like how the CRM concept bled its way down from the major airlines into kind of all the piloty forms you can take. To kind of start this off, what is it? Where did it come from? And the burning question, why is it useful?
That's a great topic. We got, about 4 or 5 hours that we can cover this in?
Yeah.
It's a great place to start. It's just defining the terms here. What is this playground that we're going to play this game in? So the first thing is, what is a threat versus what is an error? Like you say, is we trained this at the airline. We started doing it probably 10 or 12 years ago to really put a fine focus on it and think about this. So very simply, a threat is something that comes from outside the airplane into the airplane. And this could be something like a weather system that you have to deal with, or a maintenance issue that's coming up. It's outside. Somebody else, somebody not in the airplane is creating this situation. Maybe it's a construction project going on at the airport. Maybe, I don't know, it's a nav aid that's out of service. That's a threat from outside the airplane. We have to take that into consideration one way or another. So how are we going to address that? An error, on the other hand, is something that comes from inside the airplane, usually on the part of a pilot. Often it comes from failing to recognize a threat that's out there, that's real, that we have to deal with this thing. But it could be something as simple as failing to follow a procedure. Forgetting a step in a checklist, for instance, would be an error that a pilot could make that could have consequences, repercussions later on. And the question is, are we going to trap that threat or trap that error and deal with it? Or is it going to just sit there and fester and become something bigger later? And you really can't know. You don't know ahead of time. But I've found it really helps, and this is what we do at work, it helps to identify these before the flight. When you're at 0 knots and 0 feet and the engine's not running, because as soon as the engine's running, you need your attention in the outside a little bit more. You don't have as much inside. So we'll do this when the brakes are still parked, the jet bridge is still attached to the airplane, passengers are still getting on. We'll have our pre-flight briefing among the crew, and we'll start with whoever's going to fly the airplane. Okay, what threats do you see? It's night. It's raining. We're in a foreign country with language issues. That's a threat that comes out from outside. How are we going to mitigate these? Often part of my mitigation is I'll say, I'll slow down. If we need more time to deal with something, or we're taxiing along and we have a runway change, for instance, that's a threat that comes from outside. So in order to keep from making an error on this, the entire crew, usually I operate with a 2 or often a 4 pilot crew. So all 4 of us are there to try to identify any threats that are coming outside, and we're going to cross-check each other to make sure that we don't make any errors in dealing with these threats that are coming out. And I'll tell them, hey, if you need a little bit more time, just sing out. I got these brakes by my toes here. I can stop the airplane. We can pull off to the side and get out of the way if we need to. And I just did that a couple of trips ago. We needed a little bit more time to figure out what was going on with the environment, the situation that day. So if you identify this, if you raise them as a possibility at the beginning of the flight, then it's easier to recognize them when they do arise. So if you haven't thought about it and something happens, it's easier for it not to get detected and then trapped. So that pre-discussion is really important, and you have to identify them because they will happen. It's just a matter of whether you're going to trap them or not. The mantra I give, especially on multi-engine training, I do a fair amount of multi-engine training. And one of the things we talk about when we're talking about the takeoff profile is surprises are meant for birthday parties. They're not meant for airplane flights. So we want to anticipate, we want to open that package and see what's in there before the big day, which is the start of the takeoff roll. So we'll have a briefing about, okay, I'm flying the airplane. You're monitoring everything going on. If you see anything you don't like, call it out. I'll decide to reject the takeoff or not or whatever. If it happens before this speed, the action we're going to take is to close the throttles, maintain directional control, and stop it on the remaining runway. If it happens after this point, depending on the airplane, of course, a piston twin is not going to get off the ground before that speed, but a jet might up close to V1. After that point, we're going to go flying with it. We'll deal with it in the air. We're going to do the memory items on the checklist. We're going to get to a safe altitude. We're going to execute the checklist. We're going to make a decision as to whether we need to return. Do we need to dump fuel? Do we need a different runway? Did we FOD the runway we had? What's going on? And we'll talk about all these issues. And we even look at performance. So if we have to come back around and land immediately, how much runway do we need to do that? And we have this all calculated ahead of time. We've opened that birthday present and we identify what's in there. And then we just have the decision point. And this translates in GA. A lot of pilots will use the 50-70 rule, especially at high density altitude takeoffs. They'll say, if you're not to 70% of your takeoff speed by the 50% point of the runway, abort that takeoff. You're not going to have the performance to go. So, okay, that's great to say that, but identify what's your 70% of your takeoff speed. Don't just couch it as 70%. You got to do that public math. And we don't want to do that during a takeoff roll. So we want to be 50 knots. Where's the 50% point on the runway? Well, that's going to be taxiway kilo or that tree on the side of the road or whatever it is. Identify a very positive place where you need to make that decision. And then in the moment, it's not just trying to figure out what you're going to do. You already know what you're going to do. You're already there just choosing, is it going to be door A or door B? And it's going to be door A up to this point, then it'll be door B. So that's kind of sets the terms, the ground rules for this whole idea of threat and error management. You identify these alternatives ahead of time. Now we mitigate all these with barriers. And we hear about barriers a lot. We talk typically in the terms of the Swiss cheese model is the common one. Okay, so we got Swiss cheese. Let's think about this Swiss cheese a little bit. What is that exactly? Each layer of Swiss cheese is another barrier. And maybe one barrier is procedures. Maybe it's a checklist in your airplane. That's a tool you're going to use to deal with this situation. And if you've got a good checklist for it, if you identified the problem and you've determined which checklist to do, that's the first layer. Maybe the FARs are a layer of Swiss cheese. Maybe they're going to require you to have more fuel for this situation. Or maybe they're going to require you to talk to ATC before you enter that airspace. Or some rule in there, a certain amount of equipment operating on your airplane. That's all in the FAR. So that's another layer. Here's a layer I bet people don't think about too much. I'll bet your insurance company is a barrier. They might require that you do additional training beyond what the FAA requires. So there's all these layers, and the strength of those layers is going to help you at each point along this process and hopefully identify something, trap it, and correct it, mitigate it so that it doesn't become a problem at the other end. The other thing is these layers, if you think of the Swiss cheese in a warm room, right? The cheese is melting. It's getting weaker over time. So let's see if we can strengthen those barriers, and we do that by engaging in recurrent training. Maybe something like the WINGS program, or even just getting with your instructor on a regular basis, going to pilot meetings where you're going to hear some talk on a safety subject. That's going to reinforce those barriers so that cheese has a better opportunity to trap any of these errors that are trying to get through the holes. What do you think?
There's so much in what you just said that, I mean, like you said, we could absolutely speak on this for hours. I think you highlighted especially the idea of the surprises being meant for birthday parties. If somebody's talking about, well, why is the calm cockpit? Why are you guys talking about threat and air management, something developed in the airlines? What does that have to do with mental performance training and being a calmer, safer aviator? And I think you really kind of hit it right there. The more you can prepare, the more you can line yourself up with what threats are out there, create that brief. Not only are you increasing the safety for a flight in a 737 or in a Piper Cherokee, but you're also giving yourself those tools to then not be thinking about those at the worst possible moment. Because the more your brain is aligned to, I've already dealt with these things before they've happened. Now I have that brain capacity to not only react to those things should they happen, but just the basic things of holding airspeed, holding altitude, coordinated turns, because I'm not worried about over here of all the things that could happen that maybe I haven't created that plan for. So I really think that this is a great topic. And the more that our listeners learn about what this is and how to do it, I think it's going to allow for that mental performance angle that everybody's hoping for when we do these kinds of episodes.
Yeah, I agree completely. If flying the airplane is the easy part, it's all the big brain stuff, anticipating, identifying, trapping these threats that are coming at you that really is the key to the game, I guess. It kind of comes up with a lot of the discussion I see is putting an autopilot in a little airplane. How much should you use it? When should you use it? When should you not use it? Well, if you have an autopilot in your little airplane, you should think about this. Think about this ahead of time. And my own opinion, we're in the process right now of installing a new Garmin suite of avionics in my 182. Don't ask how much that costs. It makes no sense to put this much avionics in an airplane like this. But, I like the great equipment in the airplane, and it has tools in the autopilot. So, okay, we're going to have now a 3-axis autopilot that's going to do the electric trim by itself. It can fly at a glide slope. It can fly VNAV descents. It's going to do all this stuff. It's going to be great. And one argument says, well, that's great. You let the autopilot do it all the time, but your hand flying, airplane maneuvering, manipulating skills will degrade over time. Yeah, that's a very real possibility. But it also frees up your brain from the low-level basic chore of flying the airplane, maintaining control. It downloads that to this machine that can do it very accurately, very smoothly, very precisely, and lets you free up your mind to do the anticipating, the planning. Okay, I need to do a diversion. Where am I going to divert? Why am I diverting? Maybe I need fuel. Maybe I need a mechanic. Maybe I need an overnight. Let the machine fly the airplane while you do this stuff, and it frees up your brain a little bit. So it's a balance. There's no one right answer for every situation, but if you think about this ahead of time, you'll at least have some idea of what the proper way to use the tool in the moment is going to be.
Yeah, and I do want to take a second because I had never heard of the 50-70 rule. I'm not sure what that says about me, but I can tell you that is a very valuable thing to know, because I remember one time, and you sort of learn from the mistakes that could have killed you. I was instructing at a time, and I was in a 152. We were taking off with a student, and we're at that 50%, and I'm sitting there looking at the student going, is the power all the way forward? And he's like, yeah. And next thing I know, by the time we've had that discussion, we're well past the 50% mark, and we're just now lifting off, but there was no stopping. Long story short, it was a very long 20-minute flight as we were trying to figure out what to do to get back, and we had compression issues. We had a legitimate engine problem, and we took off with it because I think it was also a little bit of that denial of it's got to be something we're doing wrong, not something that's legitimately wrong. Had we briefed a little bit of something like that 50-70 rule that you mentioned, I mean, that would have stopped us on the runway and saved some of the gray hairs that I probably picked up that day. So yeah, these are good tips.
I picked that one up from Sparky Imeson. It has a book called The Mountain Flying Bible. Even if you never fly in the mountains, it is an amazing book with lots of great rules of thumb and tips for operating even in the flatlands. That's one of the rules. And I see it discussed quite often now in the trade. I've seen articles in magazines about it and that sort of thing. So, but that's part of that process of establishing your decision point and what are the options. So before that point, the option is close your throttle, maintain control of the airplane, and stop straight ahead. After that, well, your ability to fly the airplane out of that situation is now in question. How big is that question? It depends on the airplane, the environment, the situation, the skill, a whole bunch of factors. But if you make that decision at that point, then you can be on the ground trying to figure it out, which is a much better place than in the air trying to figure it out.
Right. It depends on the size of that tree at the end of the runway.
Yeah. Yep.
Which for us, we just barely cleared. So that was not a great day for me. Moving back to threat and air management, I think one of the things you talked about, and it was part of the example of the autopilot and utilizing even the autopilot or mechanical part of your airplane as part of the quote unquote crew, right? We've talked so much about CRM or crew resource management, utilizing the resources you have, utilizing any other humans in the airplane, but also the automation as part of your crew to solve problems, to mitigate threats and things like that. Would you say that CRM in and of itself is a mitigating factor to threats, or like how do those two concepts play together?
I would say good CRM can be a huge mitigating factor there. Bad CRM can be a confounding factor.
Hmm.
And so what I mean by that is before you get in the airplane, especially in the GA world where it's not as scripted and trained and experienced as it is, say, in a Part 121 airline cockpit, especially if two pilots get in the airplane together and they just go and they don't have a discussion about who's going to do what and how are things going to work, that other pilot can be a huge distraction. And I've even seen things like, for instance, that guy owns the airplane, let's say, and he's going to fly it, he knows how to fly it. I had one person I was working with in an airplane, and I would go up to the navigator and look for a piece of information, and then my technique is I always put it back the way I found it. So if I'm, say, in a Garmin 530 and I need to go look up a frequency or look at the weather for the destination, he's got it on a nav page. I'm going to put it back on that nav page when I'm done. But this particular pilot, every time I went to the 530, he would watch everything I was doing. And the airplane didn't have a very good autopilot. He didn't use it very much. So it became a distraction for him. So in later flights, I would make this as a part of my briefing. So if I go to the 530, I'm going to tell you I'm doing it. I'm just looking up a piece of information. There's something going on. I'll put it back where it was so you don't have to figure out. I'm not going to drop it off in this unknown mode back to you. That distraction cross cockpit can be a really big deal, especially for a lower time pilot who's just trying to figure out which way is up. If there's another distraction like that, you just don't need that. So who's going to fly the airplane? Even who's going to talk on the radio? Who's going to navigate the thing that you're going to do the navigation, or who's going to do it? Sort that all out ahead of time. So you're not in the air trying to figure it out. We seem to have integrated into the GA world quite a lot, this 3-step change of control of the airplane. Mm-hmm. So predominantly it's going to be the left seat pilot, let's say, flying the airplane. And I tell students when I do any kind of proficiency work with them in the airplane, you fly the airplane. It's your job to fly the airplane. I won't take control of it unless you ask me to, or if I think you're about to kill me, then I'll take it. But other than that, you keep flying it, including the autopilot. If you turn the autopilot on, and I tell them, especially this comes to play in instrument proficiency checks, I don't care who flies the airplane, if you're going to fly it or the autopilot is going to fly it, but when you turn that autopilot on, tell me. Say it aloud. Autopilot's on. It's in heading mode. It's in altitude hold mode. It's in nav track mode. Whatever it's doing, tell me. The exact same thing as changing controls person to person, changing to the machine is important because we got to know who's flying the airplane. Also, it lets me know when you do that, especially if you tell me what mode you would like it to be in, it helps me know if you didn't get that mode, I need to point that out. Hey, take a look here. You have it in heading mode. You said track mode. It's in the wrong mode. So before this turns into a problem, just, figure it out. Do what you need to do to get it back where you thought it was. So if you can think of the autopilot as a third or fourth or fifth pilot, that's a good way to think about it. You want them in the game. You got to verify what they're doing, that you have this communication back and forth. So there's no questions. Again, no surprises in the cockpit.
What is it they say? Trust but verify?
Indeed. Yes. Yep.
I can't tell you how many times I've been flying, and I used to do a lot of training with first officers in my previous job. There were times where ATC would give us a heading, but that heading would parallel our track, and it all works fine until you have a dog leg in your track and you keep going straight. There have been times where somebody has moved something or not hit the nav button again to put us back into navigational mode, and we've sat there on heading, and luckily I've never actually gone past that dog leg before, but there's been times where we've been sitting on heading for 45 minutes and we both look up and went, oh, that could have been really bad.
Are we still on a heading?
Oh, no. But it's deceiving because it looks like you're following the line, but you're not. And so, the communication and integration into what is the autopilot doing? Do we both understand what the autopilot's doing? Have we missed something? And then going back and having an additional discussion, even if nothing has changed, to say, just so you know, we're still doing this and this. Are we in agreement on that? Yes. Cool.
Yeah.
And those are conversations you can have with yourself. I mean, we've had so many discussions on this podcast. Yes, people might think you're crazy because you talk to yourself, but the number of times that I have saved myself from doing something stupid by just going, all right, I'm on heading. I'm supposed to be at 5,000. I'm flying at this. Oh, no, I made a mistake. That's huge. It's just someone to talk to reiterate the facts. And then your brain goes, nope, that's not right.
I'm my own best conversational partner.
Exactly.
But yeah, I've flown with pilots at both ends of the spectrum who either don't ever say anything. So it's hard as an instructor. I don't know what's in your mind. I don't know what you're seeing. To the other extreme where they say everything that they see, everything that they do. And that's really helpful for me as an instructor because I'll notice if you're not including in this outer dialogue, if you will, what you're seeing. So maybe you're not picking up on something over here. The oil pressure's getting a little low over here. Are you picking up on that? Are you doing an engine scan? Are you doing your outside traffic scan? And I'll know that that's not happening. So I need to put that in my debrief notes, and we're going to talk about that on the ground, or if it's critical enough, we talk about it right now.
I've learned to use that as kind of a CYA, but to me, I call it CRM, but in reality, I'm spreading the blame. And for anyone who's listened to, again, previous episodes, we've talked about, say, my experience of turning left instead of right on accident. Left, so that's the one that's shaped like an L. Perfect. And so like I've gotten into the habit as a way to protect myself from making a mistake similar to that. Again, it's like, I will say I'm turning left to 350. That way the other guy or girl who's in the cockpit is like, that's not left.
Yep.
That has happened. And so like you figure out a way to mitigate those threats. And some of it might be knowing your own personal weaknesses. Some of it might be knowing the weaknesses of, say, the autopilot, which we discussed, and then just kind of getting the ego out of the way and saying, I might make a mistake on this, so I'm going to verbalize it instead. And then I'm putting the onus on you to keep me from doing something dumb.
It's one more opportunity to catch that error or that threat before it becomes a problem. Mm-hmm. You remind me of a story when I was a brand new flight instructor. I had a young woman student I was flying with, and I'd tell her to turn left 90 degrees. And every time she did it, she would take her right hand and put it over her heart and then go back and turn it left. She did this about 3 times. And I said, why do you do that? What's going on? She says, well, I can't remember my left from my right. So I remember when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I put my right hand over my heart. That's how I identify my right hand. Okay, perfect. Well, that's your mitigation. You figured out how to do it. Awesome. Good job.
I do love to talk to myself on the daily, like when I'm doing laundry. So that has served me well in the airplane. But I do find when I'm flying solo that it really helps to keep me focused on what is important. And I'm at this interesting point now because I'm not quite in that final funnel of check ride prep, but like almost there. So I'll be flying with an instructor, and it's that interesting point where I'm doing all the briefing, like say if something happens, on the takeoff climb, what do we do? But I kind of catch myself and not always clear because they want me to, first of all, brief it as if I'm in the plane and I'm showing that I'm PIC. But I'm saying in reality, you are here with me. And so if it's engine out below 1,000, more than likely you're going to take the plane. So what I've started to try to do to catch that sort of thread of that moment of confusion of would I fly that? Would I pitch for best glide, or would he, or what would we do? I say, well, let me brief it as if I'm PIC and I just have passengers. And then I'm going to say, but this is a training flight and you're more experienced than I am. So this is how we would actually do it. I feel like I have a foot in both worlds with that, where I'm starting to take more ownership of it, but it still is like the awkward, gawky, ugly duckling teenager phase where I don't quite have ownership of the plane yet. So any feedback you guys can give me on how to handle those types of briefings, I'm in that very awkward phase right now, right? Where I don't have full command authority yet, but they're trying to train me as if I do. And it sometimes is awkward to do those briefings in a way that is realistic to the situation, but also preparing me for the future. So that's what my brain is struggling with these days.
You're a senior in high school.
Yes.
You're almost done with your training. You're about to be an adult.
Yep.
And hopefully we've given you enough tools that you can go out there and be an adult in the world and function. And you're transitioning from this. You're going to be in charge here pretty soon.
Yeah.
I remember getting text messages or phone calls from my daughter when she went off to college. And it's hard being an adult. Well, yeah, sometimes you have to make decisions. And
it's funny you say that because I was just teaching some high schoolers yoga the other day, which is something I know and feel very comfortable in. I said, pretty soon it's going to be all you making your own decisions, and no victim mentality of, oh, my life this. Anything that's in your life is there because you put it there. And they're like, whoa, that's really cool, but also really scary. And I'm like, I can relate to that in the airplane.
So physician, heal thyself, and just put yourself in those shoes. That's where you are now.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it feels like. But all of this makes tremendous sense. And I have heard of that 70-50, but I don't think I briefed that as clearly as I could. So I'm going to correct that. So thank you for that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have kind of a question. I want to throw it to both of you from different perspectives. When we're talking about threats and you're talking about the briefs, that's something that you both brought up. One of the sides to that discussion is the idea that if I brief something, it's not so scary. So now we're talking about the possibility of dealing with fear, right? Which that's what I want to throw to Geeta a little bit. But then at the same time, you really run the risk when you do these pre-flight briefs, especially with newer pilots, they get into the rote, I'm going to say this for the sake of saying it. This is what I'm supposed to say. But it doesn't do you any good if you're not actually thinking about, okay, I'm saying this for a reason, and these are the things I'm going to do, and I'm really kind of taking it to heart of, if I brief it, I'm going to do it. There's that disconnect sometimes with pilots where, even in a airline or a corporate environment where like you do the V1 abort brief. I've seen people completely go to training and blow right past all of that. Like, well, you briefed that you were going to abort and you didn't. So what's the point of briefing? So there's kind of two parts to this. Geeta, I want to talk a little bit about how does talking about the fears and briefing the fears mitigate the fears from a performance standpoint. It allows you to compartmentalize that a little bit better. And then I want to throw it to Mike and talk a little bit about how we have these things for a reason, but how do we take them to heart, if that's the right way to say it? Like, how do we make sure that if we say it, we're going to do it? So Geeta, go first. What does fear mean in all of this, and how does it make us better if we can talk about it?
Yeah. So I think fear is a good thing. Actually, fear is usually and anxiety too, quite frankly. They're natural, normal human emotions to perceive threats. And it's not something to be gotten rid of or to feel like shouldn't be part of the equation. To me, it's like you put your arm around it and you use it as a skill. It's just like anger. Anger can be very appropriate at certain moments if you use it as a tool. You just want to make sure you keep it in the tool belt when it's not useful. So fear is usually pointing to something that would be a threat to either your psychological or physical well-being. Right? This is why we do all of these briefs, because inherently we're in a very unforgiving environment. So for me, what I've noticed that these, particularly if we're talking about the briefings, what that allows us to do from a cognitive perspective is it gives a mental rehearsal for the brain to think through things in a slow fashion. So that famous quote they always use, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you repeat a thought process or a behavior process, you're literally mapping your brain so that one small stimulus, say a certain moment where you're not seeing what you need to see on the engine gauges, triggers an automatic response that will be protective to you. It's not just that, like you said, to your point on it, just saying it, but it's actually you want to have drilled that brief into your muscle memory and your neurons so that your brain has literally encoded that information. So the smallest stimulus, again, triggers this physical and mental response chain reaction of you know what you're going to do automatically. It has to be practiced and rehearsed. It's just like playing an instrument. You wouldn't just like play it a C major scale one time and then forget about it. You play it over and over. You play it every time you warm up. From the moment you play your instrument till you're a master at it, you keep repeating it because it gets deeper and richer the more you do it. So that mental rehearsal is crucial, which is something that for me helps me. And I have noticed that briefing where they just go, blah, 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 blah. They're just saying words. They're not doing anything. I speak it more slowly. Thank you, Brian Schiff, for that. I slow down and I actually mimic the motions I would do. Like if I say on the takeoff roll, if I haven't hit RPMs that I'm wanting to see by, taxiway delta or whatever, I will do throttle to idle. And I won't just say throttle idle. I'll just mimic throttle idle. And I'll just mimic gently with my body what I would do. That gets me to slow down and actually have mentally rehearsed it on a motor planning level as well. Then from a fear perspective in the brain, that's doing one last piece. The trigger is eliciting that response. But then from a fear perspective, it's down regulating the fear response so that in that moment, the fear response isn't what comes out, which would be fight, flight, freeze or flee, where the sympathetic nervous system is going to take over and your cerebral cortex, your thinking part, shuts down in those moments. That's what causes tunnel vision and all of that. So you're actually down regulating that fear response so that your cerebral cortex can remain in command authority of your person. Which is a really, really great thing. You want that fear to be there, but not to be in command. And so the briefing and practicing it with a little more intentionality hopefully sets us up well, that you may have a startle reflex and might have that freeze. Like you said, John, is this really happening? It must be us. What's up with the throttle? But then you're able to catch it and still have your brain think rather than getting carried away by the limbic system, which will put you into an automated sort of fear response stuck mode. There's a lot going on to this that is very wise of aviators. And if you think about where aviation started, really all these procedures are coming from training young men to go off to war. Right? So they had to cut through the stuff and get to the procedures that was going to keep them alive. And they did a really great job. I applaud our lineage from that perspective.
You open up a whole bunch of topics again, as usual, happens when we have these kinds of conversations, right?
Here we go.
I'm thinking, okay, so yeah, Geeta is this high schooler who's about to go off into the world. And I'm the parent. I've been doing it for a long time. I've seen it before. I kind of know a little bit about what you need to know to survive. And hopefully we've given you the training you need. And that involves a lot of repetition. We have several rules of learning what things are significant when it comes time to go to battle. And you have the rule of primacy. That which we learn first, we learn best. There's a rule of recency. That which we learned most recently or did most recently, we do best. And there's a rule of repetition. That which we do a lot, wiring those neurons together, like you say. All of those, they're all important and they all come into play. We have to do them correctly the first time. We have to do them often and we have to do them recently. That's the whole point of recurrent training. So we're going to rewire these neurons. And John, you spend some time in a simulator. We do all the things in the simulator that we can't do on the line. Right. Because it's not safe or it's not convenient. 300 passengers in my 787 don't want to see what happens when we lose an engine. But they want to know that we're ready for it when it does happen. Yeah. So that's the whole point of this training. And my wife doesn't even like it if I turn too much, we need to do something. I took a trip yesterday that was a little bit sporty weather-wise for some portions of it. Yeah, this keeping things front of mind is really important. John, you touched on the V1 cut briefing that we do before we start taxiing the airplane. Another option, another one that we do, I started doing this more directionally, I suppose, is the go-around briefing. Every approach. Okay, we're going to come down the glide slope. We're going to get the decision height is this much. We're looking for this kind of a lighting system. This PAPI is on the left-hand side. I'm looking for high intensity. Whatever it is I'm looking for, I spell that out. If I don't see that, I'm going to go missed. I'm going to say toga, hit the toga buttons. I'm going to come up on the power. We're going to go flaps 20, positive rate, gear up, check thrust. Mentally run through this just before the approach so it's front of mind. And we find out through our own safety management systems at work that we don't do a real good job doing go-arounds, either at work or in the GA world. I see this a lot. In fact, I was just working with a student the other day. I called a go-around, and the first thing they did was get on the microphone and say they're going around at a non-tower airport. I said, well, that's great, but communication is the last thing on the list. If you keep in mind the top 3 items, aviate, navigate, communicate. So aviate, fly the airplane, get it under control. You got a nice stable approach. Everything's trimmed up. Everything's looking good. Oh, we got to go around. Now we're going to change the mode of flight. That takes some action, takes some practice to do it well. And then navigate, make sure you're not going to hit the airplane that just took off underneath you or whatever. Where's the traffic pattern? What am I going to do? Last item on that list is communicate. Make sure you get things in the right order, but think about that. Think about it before you land. If I have to go around, here's what it's going to look like. And, we got a mountain here. I can't turn right. I got to turn left. Whatever the issue is at that airport, think about it so it's front of mind and you're not wondering what to do in the moment. Back to my earlier discussion.
Then what keeps us from just saying things and not meaning them? I mean, I guess that's a thing for life in general, but what keeps us from going through these things and saying, well, I briefed it, but did you really?
Did you internalize all that stuff you just talked about? And
exactly.
Yeah, the repetition in the simulator for GA pilots, I wish they would make more use of flight simulators, especially with an instructor who's familiar with all these concepts and can set up a scenario in the simulator simulator that's going to cause them to have to use these tools. And if you can do that appropriately, and back to the multi-engine thing, I spend a session in the simulator before we start doing the serious engine out work in the airplane. And as I tell my students, if you have both engines running for more than about 30 seconds, I'm not doing my job over here. You're going to get so many engine failures that you're going to be absolutely automatic and natural with your response to that engine failure. And then we're going to go do it in the airplane. And the advantage to the simulator is you can do it in some regimes that are unsafe to do in the airplane. For instance, in the airplane, according to the ACS, we can't simulate the failure of an engine at a speed higher than 50% of VMC or lower than 400 feet altitude. So there's a window in there where you've got a gray zone. That's a danger zone. You can't do that in the airplane, but I can do that in a simulator. So you're going to get it there, and it's going to be automatic. And I had an engine failure myself in a 310 at about 500 feet altitude, which is right in the danger zone. And I had been teaching it and doing it so much in the airplane. I have a flight data recorder. I record every parameter on every flight I fly. You can't even see a burble in that flight path. I was so practiced at it that when it happened, it's okay, maintain directional control, mixtures up, props up, throttles up, flaps up, gear up, the whole routine, the litany. And it was automatic, it was natural, and you can't even see the airplane move. That repetition and the recency that's why recurrent training is so important. And that's why a flight review every other year is just not adequate. They really, especially if you're flying a more capable airplane, a high performance airplane, a multi-engine airplane, you need to practice this a lot more often than every 2 years, I think.
And it goes to show that for those pilots out there, and I think we're all guilty of at least thinking about it, to go and do a flight review with a friend of theirs or somebody they know, and we'll just go fly and we'll get a sign off and cover what's bare minimum asked of us. But to go and get a flight review from an instructor who's gonna put you through the ringer, not because they're being mean, but because, like you said, you're gonna do this once every 2 years. Like, let's talk about the things that are gonna really be dangerous for you and see what we can do to brush that rust off, because you don't want to be doing a engine out glide for the first time in 2 years when you actually need it.
Right. You want to practice these maneuvers before they become a problem. And if you think back to your own primary training and Geeta's recent training, you might have had a little trepidation when it came time to learn stalls in the airplane. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people approach that with real fear. The airplane's going to fall out of the sky. I'm going to completely lose control. And no, you learn about the aerodynamics ahead of time, practice the response. And coming back to the other thing, not just simulators, but even just chair flying is adequate. You think all I need to do is unload this wing and the stall stops. And it's simple. And now go in the airplane and demonstrate it. And now, after you've done dozens, maybe hundreds of stalls, you think, okay, what's the big deal? I just got to lower the nose. Put the nose toward my toes and it's going to work better. But if you aren't front of mind with this, we see it in the accident record. Loss of control is the NTSB's number one item. And this is a failure to execute the proper aerodynamic response to the condition of the airplane. So usually it's attached to a distraction, and that distraction happens because you didn't anticipate something that's happening. So the more you can anticipate these things happening, the less you're distracted. If you've practiced it, I had a student I was checking out, he just bought a Mooney, and we had a door open during flight, and I could see his anxiety level just ratchet through the roof. And I just said, fly the airplane. We got back down on the ground and everything was fine. We checked it. We closed the door. We took back off again. He called me a day or two later. He says, Mike, all I'm hearing is you in my head saying, fly the airplane. He says, I will never forget that. So that's why we want you to experience it and focus on what's important. Aviate, navigate, communicate. If it happens again, he's not going to be distracted. He's going to fly the airplane.
So a little bit on that. I mean, when Mike Jesch, airline pilot extraordinaire, shows up in the morning and you're thinking about all of these things that we just chatted about, the threats, the things happening in your personal life, did you get good enough sleep? Did you have any kind of additional stressors enact in you? How do you recognize those in yourself, especially if you're a crew of one, you're flying your own airplane, but then also maybe there are other people out there? How do you address that with either yourself or other people as a mitigation strategy? What does that look like for you in your daily routine?
plane. I think what helps is, this is going to end up, if left unchecked, it's going to end up in making a mistake somewhere, maybe a big mistake. So I just kind of keep in mind any small mistakes that are coming up. Just yesterday, I ended up flying over 6 hours in a friend's airplane. It wasn't my own airplane. Even a frequency change to a new sector. I don't know if I didn't push the button or if I pushed it twice, but I got handed off to a new frequency and I checked in on the new frequency. It was really the old frequency. That's a little tiny, almost inconsequential mistake. No big deal. I just push the button again, make sure the frequency swapped and I'm on the new frequency and I'll check in. Well, okay, so did I not catch that when I pushed it or did I not push it? Does it matter? It really doesn't matter. I wasn't really on the new frequency, but that was a little mistake. Any other little mistakes I'm making? They do start to add up. A friend of mine, a gentleman a long time ago, pretty involved with the FAST team, gave us a talk, and he keeps a little notebook in his pocket when he makes a mistake. If he misplaces his keys, can't find the keys. So you open the refrigerator door, you forget what you went there for. These are little mistakes that add up. He started keeping track of every time he made a mistake like this. And I think it was part of his own cognition exam, if you will, kind of monitoring his own cognition. So if you do this, you establish your trend. You know where your baseline is, and you know when you start to get over that baseline. Maybe it's time that I got to stop. We just had somebody declare an emergency because they were fatigued a couple of weeks ago. That's the first time I've heard of somebody doing that. They recognize they reached their limit, got to land. Wow, I think that's a powerful tool. I think that was a great decision. I think now we've seen somebody do it. Maybe more of us will do that when it's time just to land for the night. Call it quits. All these little things add up to a trend of degradation. And if that trend ends up going in the wrong direction or passes a certain threshold, and I can't define what that is for you, only you can do that. And maybe that threshold moves over time. Over the course of the day. You think about some of these fatigue risk management tools. One of the parameters in there is how many hours are you going to fly this day? Are you flying after work? You've already had a long day. Now you're going to fly late at night or in the evening, later than you planned to. The flight just naturally got late for reasons that came up, whatever it was. So these are, again, heads up, red alert. Things are going in the wrong direction. Take a moment, take a deep breath, assess, do you really need to go? In fact, a couple of days ago, Saturday before we took this trip yesterday, it was a family visit to go see my mother-in-law. My wife said, well, we got to do it tomorrow or we can't do it this week. And I said, no, we don't have to make that trip. You know, that's the one difference here is like Brian says, one of my favorite sayings he gives is, my suitcase doesn't care where it spends the night. Maybe it's not my intended point B, but it's a point C somewhere along the way or D or what have you. It doesn't matter to me where I spend the night. Another friend of mine says that the best piece of safety equipment I have on board the airplane, he pulls out his credit card and he says, I can get a hotel anywhere with this. That's a pretty good safety tool. So make sure you've got these backups and then you won't feel so pressured to stick with plan A when you know you've got viable plans B and C.
Yeah, the quote I've said multiple times on this show is my favorite by Bob Mader, and he says, show me in the POH where the emergency takeoff checklist is.
Yeah, exactly. We never have to go.
Yeah.
And you touched on something. At what point does perseverance or resilience become denial of your situation? At what point do you cross that threshold of like, I'm pushing myself because I want to grow to, I really shouldn't have done this? And how, as a experienced instructor, how do I show a student, someone in Geeta's position who's nearly there, about to grab that brass ring, about to go flying by herself? Like, how do I impress that onto these young pilots?
Yeah, not just flying by yourself, but flying by yourself without adult supervision. You're on your own now.
Or even with family and friends, which is its
exactly.
whole
Even
other
more
additional
pressure.
can.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens is if you fail to recognize that things aren't going your way, you're making excuses for why this or that's happening, and you're not going to let it deter you from your goal. And this comes back to, again, identify these decision points along the way and know what your options are and make sure you've got a good, solid gold option. Pilots will start to think, I got this. I've done this before. It worked last time. That's called the normalization of deviance. All these things have names because we've all been there before. It's been happening for years. So over time, we see it happening more than once, in some cases, dozens of times. We put terms on them. But when you fail to recognize that it's not going your way. I think that's where I kind of draw the line myself. Failure to recognize, failure to appreciate that it's not going right. It's not just resilience is, yeah, this is a small problem. I get through it, to denial saying that's not a problem at all. I can go through it. That's where that line is. And again, it's different for you. It's different for me. It's different for the conditions. For the airplane we're in, for the location I'm in, the pressures, whatever. You need to recognize when that's not adding up and when it's time to call it quits. I've had this before. We're flying home from Yellowstone on a family vacation down across western Utah and eastern Nevada. It was rougher than rough. We got a late start because there were low ice-laden clouds that kept us in the valley, so we couldn't take off until the weather cleared. So we did that. The problem is now we're over the desert. It's hot and it's bumpy and it's miserable, and my wife does not like turbulence. My daughter is not much better than that. And we're flying along, and finally I said, okay, we got wind over Utah. We can stop right here. They got, let's see, the notes here say they got a bus will take us over to the casino for lunch. We can stop and take a breather. And so that was when we threw in the towel and called it quits. Of course, now we take off again, and it's still bumpy. We're coming up over Las Vegas, and I said, we could just drop in here to Las Vegas and spend the night and continue on home tomorrow morning when it's going to be smooth. And my wife says, well, how much longer do we have to go? And I said, it's about another hour and a half, maybe. And she said, we can press on. So I left that in her hands. I don't mind the turbulence. I've been through enough turbulence in my life. Crossed the border into California, smoothed out the whole rest of the way. So it was just another 10 minutes happened to be enough in that case. But if it was still rough by the time we got to Victorville, we probably would have stopped for the night there. Before we get over the last ridge of mountains. We were getting tired of the resilience. It was enough of being resilient through the turbulence and all that. And denial, I know it's there. I can't deny this turbulence. We can make it better. We have options. So we took one of them and it worked.
Well, I think that the lesson in that is sort of twofold. The big thing that I always taught my students was just the huge respect for personal minimums. You've made your determination. These are the winds I'm comfortable with. These are the crosswinds I'm comfortable with, the visibility, the ceiling, whatever that looks like. And you kind of have to hold yourself to stick to those. Now, that's not to say that personal minimums can't expand. That's how you grow. But when you start expanding your personal minimums, you've also considered that maybe there's a safety net there of an instructor or a pilot who's more experienced, and you're briefing like, hey, I normally wouldn't do this, but you're here to keep me safe. That is your role. Having those personal minimums there, especially for a newer pilot, I think is a huge thing. That is a way of getting out of trouble, because now I don't have to take the responsibility of saying, hey, I'm too afraid to go, or I'm not sure I'm capable of this. No, it's not about that. It's about, these are the personal minimums that are set. These are what I wrote down. Like, we used to have pilot qualification cards at my flight school. So it wasn't about what do you feel comfortable with. It's, is it on the card or is it not? Black and white, done. It took the guilt, the feeling bad about should I go, should I not go, completely out of it from both the instructor as well as the student. Because if we wanted you to go more, I would have written you a different card yesterday, but I didn't. So there's no debate. And I think that that's huge. I think the other thing is just, again, knowing that dynamic situation of flying. Similar to what you said, my suitcase does not care where I'm sleeping at night. Well, when we used to do long distance charter, okay, we're a little bit less rigid than the airlines. If I'm in a jet and I'm sitting here in Michigan and I'm trying to take a group of passengers down to Florida, but Florida is full of thunderstorms and Naples is just awful, but I know it's going to take me 3 hours to get there, and I'm looking at the weather and, what am I going to do? Well, there's a ton of things I can do. I can launch as normal. The plan is that, the weather's going to be gone by the time I get there. There's option one. At any point on that 3-hour flight down there, I need to land in, Atlanta to give it another hour. I can land in Atlanta. I don't have to tell anybody. I don't work for an airline. I can divert. I can go wherever I want to go. So sometimes we would just tell the passengers, this situation is very flexible. You can choose not to go at all. I can get you as close as I possibly can that's still safe, and we can wait it out and do whatever, or we can just launch and hope for the best. And the safe option is still going to be hold or land somewhere else. You have to be under the understanding that there is a certain amount of flexibility, and it's the moment that you start sticking to that rigid plan that bad things start to happen. And that can be tough. I mean, that is not something that we are built for. It's so often you hear, I need to complete the mission. I need to get here. I need to go there. That's when people start making those mistakes and letting the threat take over. As you pointed out, error being something that the pilots make, well, that threat leads to that error, and then bad things happen. So I love the conversation because there's so much wrapped up in this. And it's, to Geeta's point, it's understanding sort of that human psychology of what we want versus what happens and how do we deal with what the in-between looks like.
You started that discussion with personal minimums, and basically my own personal minimums are pretty much what's on the page as far as weather goes, but there are other personal minimums. It's not just weather. It's not just ceiling and visibility, or you mentioned wind. That's a good one. It's also how much fuel in the tank. As you fly along, your options are included in a radius that's the size of your fuel tank. And as you fly along, that circle gets smaller to where you're reducing your number of options as you go to eventually, if you get to the point where there's exactly one option left, then you're in trouble. You've closed all these other doors. And whether it's a wind number or an overcast, a ceiling height or whatever, I really try to encourage pilots to write them down for exactly that reason you mentioned. Then you've made a commitment to yourself and to your family, to your passengers, to the people around you that here's your limits. Do it the day before. Don't do it the day of a flight. Don't ever change the minimums in order to accomplish a particular flight. If you do that, you've just thrown that entire card out and it means nothing. That commitment you made is gone. So write them down. You're absolutely right. They do go up and down. You can adjust them up and down, perhaps with recent training, for instance, might make it better. If you haven't had training in a while, maybe that makes them higher or more restrictive. It's best to have a policy for how that works that you've thought about ahead of time, and don't try to make it up as you go. Again, otherwise these are not really personal minimums. It's not a hard limit. We have these in the airline. When a pilot checks out in a new seat or in a new airplane, they have to raise their personal minimums until they've gained a certain amount of experience. So it's in the book. When I checked out on the 737, I had a couple of times where the takeoff visibility was below my personal takeoff minimum. I can't go. I'm not qualified and I'm not experienced enough on this airplane. Once you get that experience, then the numbers come down. Yeah, recurrent training, again, will lower those numbers for you or make them less restrictive so you have more options.
One thing I really love about this community I'm part of, the Midlife Pilot podcast community, they have a tremendous Discord channel where, I mean, people post about all nature of things, but they have one specific thread that is for publicly displaying your personal minimums. So not only do you have your personal minimums, but you share them with the whole entire community. And they also have another thread that is a go, no-go decision thread. So if you're sitting there and you're feeling a little squirrely or, you know, feel yourself, like you said, kind of moving from being resilient into being, I want to say, stupid, you can go to that thread and say, somebody check me, please. This is my thought process. It's a community you can go to not only just have your personal minimums out there, but actually have some accountability. So I think for a lot of us older GA pilots, that accountability, like you do have at the major airlines, isn't always there. So we have to intentionally build that in. So I just want to give a plug for that. If anyone's listening, that's a great resource to have people checking your actions. And I plan on using that as I'm literally writing my personal minimums this week. Figuring that all out.
I would posit that this community is another layer of Swiss cheese.
Absolutely, it is 100%.
You know, who wants to be the one that wraps your airplane up in a ball on the end of the runway and have your community talking about, oh, that Mike, he was such a great pilot. He would never have done that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? They do that. It's often said that your hearing improves at the hearing. After the incident, yet they're asking you, why did you do what you did? And you do the carpet dance, you got to justify it. Well, can you do that? Always, of course, the safest decision is to stay put, not fly anywhere, but that's not why we have airplanes. They're meant to go places, and they open up a tremendous world for us of recreational and business opportunity, whatever the reason is to go, entertainment, tourism. It's an amazing tool for that. We could always stay at home and in bed, but that's not where the fun is. That's not where the real world is. So we got to identify and mitigate these risks along the way so that we get to do it more.
So as we start to kind of wind this down a little bit, and some of this we've touched on, so it's kind of putting a nice bow on things. But over the course of your career, the things you've seen, the things you've taught, the achievements that you've made, what have you seen in yourself or others that really kind of highlight good habits in terms of those that can make good decisions, that can be safe in the cockpit? Like, what are these golden words of wisdom that you've seen over the years, either through people making mistakes or people making the right choices, that you've kind of collected and said, I'm going to use that one or I'm not going to use that one?
Yeah, for me, it's always just an innate curiosity to learn stuff and read stuff and be exposed to things. I'm a member of all the organizations out there. I subscribe to a bunch of magazines. I participate in a bunch of online forums. I want to hear what other pilots in particular, other people are experiencing. I want to learn from their mistakes, because if I have a good long life, I'm never going to live long enough to make all the mistakes myself. So I want to try to learn from other people's mistakes. That's where these forums and these vehicles come into play, and things like that. I mean, for decades that I know of, Flying Magazine has had I learned about flying from that. So learn about a mistake that somebody else made, some threat or some error that they made that didn't mitigate that thing that came close. Maybe they just escaped, or maybe they did have a little bit of an accident and managed to live to tell the tale. I want to learn about that. And not just aviation stuff. There's a whole bunch of other stories, books you can read that you never know when there's some little nugget in there that's going to resonate with you at some point that might be the thing that makes the difference. Actually, there was a book I read about. It's called Humble Pie. It's about math mistakes that ended up in tragedy. And it's not about flying. It's about mostly engineering type mistakes. And that's where I got this image of the melting cheese. So you need to reinforce that cheese along the way. It was in that book. Nothing to do with aviation. But you just never know when some little nugget is going to be the one that saves your bacon. And for me, people often say, well, you must be a really good pilot because you've been flying for so long. Well, it doesn't mean I'm any good at it. It just means I do it a lot. And I've been very lucky to do it for a long period of time. But I've thought about this a little bit, that it's not that I make good decisions along the way, but I can identify these threats from farther away, and I can make a small decision now, a small adjustment now that makes it so I don't need to make a big adjustment later. This is often couched in the phrase that I use my superior judgment so I can avoid having to demonstrate my superior airmanship. So if I make a little tweak now, you won't even know that I made a tweak, but it'll avoid a situation later, or could help avoid a situation later that I'll have to really deal with and demonstrate some good airmanship. So I try to stay out of the weeds, and I find that's getting easier for me to do as I get older, as I get to do it more. It makes for a lot more comfortable flight. My passengers are happier. My airplane runs better, lasts longer. I don't change so many tires anymore, that sort of thing that happens, because I've been able to develop this skill and watching other people do it and hearing from other people in other venues.
One of my favorite sayings is, I'm still waiting on my perfect flight.
Yeah.
Right. So in this and many of the other topics we've discussed, it's so easy to have that desire for perfection and have that desire to mitigate every threat and to stop every error and, I'm never going to do that, or I'm never going to do this. It's understanding that they are going to happen and accepting the fact that no matter what you do, you're going to make that little mistake. You're going to double tap that comm frequency. You're going to hit heading instead of nav on some cases, but it's that humbleness of learning to say, I made this mistake. I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to learn from it and not do it again, or hopefully not do it again, or figure out ways to mitigate it if I do. And that's where that growth in understanding that threat comes from. And so when I think about the advice that I have for someone in Geeta's position, or somebody as a student pilot, and they're learning all of these things, it's that acceptance that errors are going to happen. You have to understand that there's no way to stop that. And with thousands of hours, we're still waiting on our perfect flight. So just learn that those errors don't have to be the end. You just have to learn to accept, mitigate, and communicate about those errors if you need to.
I said once with an instructor friend of mine in the right seat doing some proficiency work with me, we're getting ready to go. I said, well, let's see if I can get it right this time. And it was kind of a throwaway line, but he debriefed me on it after the flight. And so that's an interesting way to get at it, recognizing that I probably made some mistakes on the last flight. Did I learn from it? Did I integrate these into my operations so that I don't make that same mistake again? And I have had some flights that I thought came pretty darn close to perfect, but I'm still looking for that perfect one, like you say. Maybe the next one. Maybe I'll get the next one right.
So, but Geeta's probably had one,
Oh,
she's had
sure.
good instructors. We know
all the time. I'm surprised the FAA just hasn't shown up at my door and said, "Here you go. You don't need
the check ride. We're just going to deliver your ticket now."
Yeah, just take it and go.
Yep.
Certainly have gained a lot. I feel like I have like such an ace up the sleeve. All these episodes we've done, all the people I've gotten to learn from, it's amazing what bubbles up in your mind when you're, doing a maneuver or just having a moment where I'm soloing and maybe having that little bit, okay, let's do this thing. To your point of just that innate curiosity, everything that I've learned from all of our guests, including you, it comes bubbling up in those moments when you need it. So that's one thing I love about aviation is it sort of ties together all of the human elements and all the education parts and puts it when your butt is in the seat on the line to perform it. It's pretty cool. So I appreciate all of your
interesting. You mentioned music often for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
That friend of mine who debriefed me on that, let's see if I can get it right this time, flight. He is also a professional musician. I guarantee you've heard him. He's been on movie soundtracks, and he's been in a band that won Grammy Awards, and he's toured the world.
Cool.
A professional musician and flight instructor. Jay Mason is his name. He's one of my few friends I keep in touch with from high school. But he gave us a talk a number of years ago. I called it Music in the Skies, and he talks about that bridge between the skill of a professional musician and the skills of a professional pilot. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of drilling the basics. Just do it over and over. Do the C major scale. The first thing you do when you pick up your axe every time is the C major scale. He and I were in marching band together in high school. So that's kind of where we go way back.
Nice.
But it's the same in music. It's the same in aviation. It's probably the same in almost any vocation you could take up. Doctors would probably say the same thing. Current education practice is critical in all of these fields like that. And the more you do it, the better you are, the easier it gets, and the more fun you have.
What instrument did you play?
I played trumpet.
Okay, we can still be friends. Okay.
I was last chair trumpet. He was first chair sax. And
you were last chair.
I didn't have any ambitions. I got my pilot's license in high school, and so my eyes were on the skies.
I love the trumpet, though. It's not an easy instrument to play. If you clung on to that last chair, you had some chops. So well done.
Well, yeah, and it's not an easy instrument to play, which is why I was always last chair. So.
At least they didn't tell you, just march along and fake like you're playing. Just don't play, just march.
I picked the right vocation out of high school. I went into aviation. He went into music predominantly, and I think we both made the right choice.
Your artistry shines every time you fly, I have no doubt.
Oh. And with that, Mike, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. I've learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners have as well. And just the lessons from your experience. And you said it, learn from other people's mistakes, learn from other people's knowledge. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
You're very welcome. And I thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to be here.
Listeners, we hope that you enjoyed that interview with Mike. One standout quote for me was, "I use my superior judgment so I can avoid having to demonstrate my superior airmanship." That's really at the heart of the calm cockpit philosophy. Let's talk and think ahead of time so that we can fly our best.
I totally agree. And I was really thrilled when he sent us an email after we recorded the interview to say, I finished. I'm actually qualified to be a designated pilot examiner. I'd love to have someone like him show up as my DPE because he's creating that really safe and calm environment for applicants to really show their stuff. And now that I've listened to the interview through, I think when we did it initially, but then also after you edited it, what really strikes me is how precise and calm and thorough he is with everything. And I don't know about you, John, but when I'm in the airplane and when I operate at that speed of just one thing at a time, it takes the temperature down, as you would say. It helps me just to focus on what am I doing now and what's next. So I feel like he just embodies that, just even in the way that he speaks.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this before, but I always love seeing the common threads between the things that we talk about. And one of the other things he mentioned in that email where he told us that he had just become a DPE was that he had listened to our episode with Chris Anderson, who is a DPE. That whole episode revolved around kind of bringing the temperature down for applicants as a examiner. And so he had said that he was sort of using that as a way to kind of structure his impending first check ride with a applicant. So all of these things kind of come back together. And I love to see not just how we're helping potential listeners, but how our guests are finding different ways to sort of correlate these things together as well. So there's so much good stuff in this interview, including his suitcase rule. And your suitcase doesn't care where it spends its evenings. So don't be afraid to divert, to delay, to stay overnight in places that maybe you weren't planning to. It's a good sign of judgment, not failure.
And that's a really important reframing, saying it was good judgment, not a failure. And I think that we've got a bunch of benefits to what he was talking about to pilot performance. And I just jotted down 5 of them really quickly here because my brain loves a good bullet point. But that good threat and error management does these things. It's going to increase that cognitive bandwidth. It helps downregulate the fear response. It's going to normalize a threat. So instead of it turning into like a scary thing, it then becomes something that you know how to handle, which means if you have a high stress situation, you can handle it instead of going into a fear response. Good threat and error management is going to enhance that trapping the errors through talking through things when you're in the cockpit. And I love the last one, which is his Swiss cheese model, but I like that he added that it's like melty Swiss cheese. You're really trying to bake those layers together so that it's like this standard operating procedure is so dense and thick that very few errors are going to get through there. So I think the correlation between threat and error management and pilot performance, it's so clear to me anyway. And I know I learned a lot as a student pilot listening to all of this that I hope informs how I fly.
Yeah, and so did I. And it's interesting because when I'm on sort of the longer flights for my company and talking with my coworkers, who obviously are other pilots as well, this has come up. We've talked about threat and error management and specifically the Swiss cheese model. And I've brought it up to them like, ooh, I just heard somebody discuss this in a way of the cheese kind of closing and opening different holes. So you have to be constantly looking at, well, where's the next hole going to open? It's not a static model. Sharing that as I think about it myself and getting the feedback from my coworkers, they've kind of gone down that same line of like, I never really thought of it that way. And boy, that really changes the perspective on how you can view impending issues before they even happen. So you can always find new ways of learning things no matter how much experience you have.
Absolutely. Amen. And to that end, listeners, we do want to hear from you. Drop us an email at calmcockpit@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, anything that resonated about Mike's interview. In fact, he's reached out to us a number of times with comments on the show via email, and it helps us to inform what else we might record for you guys and what else you want to hear about. What problems are you having? So please do drop us that email. And you can also find us on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to leave some comments there. John, can you talk about some 5-star reviews for the people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can rate us on any of the podcast platforms, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Amazon Music. We're pretty much in all of the different places, and every rating helps. We'd love to see 5 stars, but I suppose I should tell you to be honest. And any comments that we can get, we'd also appreciate, especially if it's ideas for future episodes, things you like, things you'd like to hear, and maybe even solutions to problems that you have that we could structure an episode around. So we just want to enjoy your feedback and share it with others.
Absolutely. So until next time, fly smarter
and stress less.
Boston Tower 1 departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding crossing runway 33 left 3 lane.